On the evening of October 17, 2006, the Riverside Grand Casino in St. Louis, Missouri, was in full swing. Slot machines chimed their electronic melodies, cards shuffled across felt tables, and thousands of patrons moved through the sprawling gaming floor with dreams of fortune. But the real money that night wasn't changing hands at the tables. It was moving through the veins of the building itself, through back corridors and service elevators, handled by people whose faces most guests would never see. Jamal Richardson was one of those invisible workers. For 3 years, he had arrived at the Riverside Grand at 11 o'clock each night, clocked in at the service entrance on Laclede Avenue, and begun his rounds through the labyrinth of hallways that kept the casino's glamorous facade running smoothly. His job was simple: collect trash and refuse from every department, load it into the compactor truck, and transport it to the designated disposal site before dawn. It was monotonous work, the kind that made hours blur together, the kind that paid just enough to cover rent on his apartment in the Dutchtown neighborhood and groceries for his 2 daughters. That October night began like any other. The air outside carried the first real chill of autumn, and inside the service corridors the fluorescent lights hummed their constant drone. Jamal moved through his route with practiced efficiency, pulling his industrial cart from kitchen to count room to administrative offices. Nobody looked at him twice. To the dealers finishing their shifts and the security guards monitoring hallways, he was part of the architecture, as permanent and unremarkable as the concrete walls themselves. What nobody knew, what couldn't have been predicted, was that in approximately 4 hours, Jamal Richardson would make a decision that would trigger one of the most unusual theft cases in Missouri gambling history. And it would all begin with a bag that felt wrong. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Riverside Grand Casino had opened its doors in 1998, part of the riverboat gaming boom that transformed the St. Louis waterfront. By 2006, it was processing an average of $12 million in cash transactions daily. The counting room alone employed 47 people across 3 shifts, and the protocols for handling currency were exhaustive. Bills moved from the casino floor in locked canvas bags, were verified by at least 2 employees at every transfer point, and were logged in a computer system that tracked every dollar from slot machine to armored car. But protocols are only as good as the people executing them, and on the night of October 17th, the evening shift in the cash operations department was understaffed and running behind schedule. A stomach flu had torn through the team that week, and 2 senior counters had called in sick. The remaining staff was working double time to process the day's receipts before the armored car arrival scheduled for 6 in the morning. Jamal Richardson knew none of this as he pushed his cart down the B-level corridor at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. His route took him past the cash operations area twice per shift. The first pass collected general office waste. The second, around 3 o'clock, picked up shredded documents and other materials that had been cleared for disposal. The department had strict rules about what could leave the area. Everything that touched money, even empty bags and used equipment, went through a separate secure disposal process handled by Brinks. But on this particular night, in the chaos of a short-staffed counting room, someone made a mistake. Sharon Hodges had been working at the Riverside Grand for 6 months. She was 23 years old, still learning the intricate dance of cash handling procedures, and on October 17th, she was covering for her supervisor who had left early with a migraine. At 2:47 a.m., Sharon was trying to clear the staging area before the armored car shift began. She had 6 canvas deposit bags lined up near the secure door, each one tagged and logged, waiting for final verification. Next to them sat 2 heavy-duty waste bags filled with shredded audit papers and empty deposit envelopes, ready for Jamal's next pass. In her exhaustion, Sharon made a critical error. She grabbed what she thought were the 2 waste bags and placed them in the designated pickup zone outside the cash operations door. But in the identical industrial lighting of the corridor, she had picked up 2 of the deposit bags instead. Inside those bags were bundled stacks of $100 bills, sorted and counted, totaling $4.9 million. They were meant for the Federal Reserve Bank shipment departing in 3 hours. When Jamal arrived at 3:12 a.m., he found the 2 bags waiting in their usual spot. They looked standard heavy-duty black contractor bags, the same type used throughout the facility. He lifted the first one and immediately noticed something unusual. The weight was substantial, far more than shredded paper, and the contents felt rigid, packed tight. He set it on his cart and lifted the second bag. Same thing. Dense, heavy, unmistakable resistance. For a moment, Jamal stood in that empty hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt the first whisper of curiosity. 3 years of this job had taught him the approximate weight of every type of refuse in the building. Kitchen waste had a wet heaviness. Office trash was light and rustling. Shredded paper had a particular compressed density. These bags felt different. Wrong. He glanced down the corridor. Empty. The nearest security camera was 20 feet behind him, angled to cover the cash operations door, not the service alcove. His shift supervisor was somewhere on the 3rd floor. The casino floor was 4 walls and countless tons of concrete away. In this moment, in this forgotten corner of the building, Jamal was completely alone. He set the second bag down and loosened the drawstring on the first. The opening revealed tight stacks of currency wrapped in paper bands. Even in the dim service lighting, he could see the purple stripe of $100 bills. His heart began to pound against his ribs. He didn't pull anything out, didn't touch the money directly. He simply stared for 3, maybe 4 seconds, then tied the bag closed again. Jamal Richardson stood 5'9", weighed 160 pounds, and had exactly $412 in his checking account. His rent was $750 a month. His car insurance was overdue. His oldest daughter needed braces that his dental plan wouldn't fully cover. He worked 45 hours a week in a job that left him invisible, unnoticed, unappreciated. And now, in his hands, he held more money than he would earn in a lifetime. The decision took less than a minute. He placed both bags on his cart, covered them with a layer of legitimate trash bags from the administrative offices, and continued his route. His hands were steady, his pace unchanged. To anyone watching, he was simply Jamal Richardson, the night sanitation worker, doing exactly what he did every night. He collected refuse from the remaining departments, compressed everything in the designated compactor room, and at 4:38 a.m., he loaded his truck for the trip to the disposal site. The Riverside Grand contracted with Tri-County Waste Management for all non-hazardous refuse removal. Jamal's route ended at the West County Transfer Station on Olive Boulevard, a sprawling facility that processed commercial waste from across the metropolitan area. He had made this drive 5 nights a week for 3 years. He knew every turn, every traffic light, every crack in the pavement. As he drove through the empty pre-dawn streets of St. Louis, Jamal's mind was racing, even as his hands remained calm on the steering wheel. The bags were in the back of his truck, compressed under layers of legitimate casino waste. In less than an hour, they would be dumped into the transfer station's receiving pit, loaded onto larger trucks, and transported to the Bridgeton landfill, where they would be buried under thousands of tons of refuse. He arrived at the transfer station at 5:03 a.m. The facility was just coming to life. A few early workers moving through the sorting area. heavy equipment warming up in the cold morning air. Jamal backed his truck up to the designated bay, activated the hydraulic lift, and watched as the entire load slid down the ramp into the massive receiving pit below. The bags, containing $4.9 million, disappeared into a mountain of refuse. Within minutes, a front-end loader was pushing the pile toward the compactor that would load it onto the long-haul trucks. Jamal completed his paperwork, logged his disposal weight with the attendant, and drove back to the Riverside Grand. He arrived at 5:47 a.m., parked the truck in the service lot, and clocked out at 5:52 a.m. His shift had ended 13 minutes early. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The sun was beginning to rise over the Mississippi River as Jamal drove home to his apartment on Tennessee Avenue. He did not speed. He did not take an unusual route. He stopped at a Quick Trip for coffee and a breakfast sandwich, the same thing he bought most mornings. He nodded to the clerk who knew him by sight, if not by name. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. At the Riverside Grand Casino, the morning shift was arriving. The armored car from Brinks pulled up to the secure loading dock at 6:15 a.m. Inside the cash operations department, the day supervisor, Martin Chen, began the handoff protocol. He checked the logbook, verified the sealed bags waiting in the secure room, and began counting. 6 bags were listed for pickup. Only 4 were present. The initial assumption was clerical error. Perhaps the overnight shift had miscounted. Perhaps the bags were still in the counting room awaiting final verification. Martin spent 20 minutes searching, checking logs, asking questions. The 2 missing bags had been documented as sealed and ready at 2:45 a.m., signed off by Sharon Hodges. But they were nowhere to be found. By 6:45 a.m., Martin had escalated to casino security. By 7:10 a.m., the security director had pulled the overnight logs and begun reviewing camera footage. And by 7:53 a.m., when they confirmed that $4.9 million in cash had vanished from a secured facility, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department received the call that would launch one of the strangest investigations of the year. Detective Raymond Pierce had been with the Major Case Squad for 11 years. He had worked robberies, burglaries, and organized theft rings. But when he arrived at the Riverside Grand at 8:30 a.m. on October 18th, he immediately knew this case was different. There had been no break-in, no forced entry, no violence. The money had simply disappeared from inside a secured, monitored facility. The security footage told a confusing story. At 2:47 a.m., Sharon Hodges could be seen placing 2 bags in the corridor pickup zone. At 3:12 a.m., a man in a sanitation uniform collected them. The footage showed him pausing, appearing to inspect 1 bag, then loading both onto his cart and continuing his route. The man was identified within minutes. Jamal Richardson, employee number 4782, 3 years with the facility, no disciplinary record, no red flags. But here's where the case became complicated. By the time Detective Pierce and his team had identified Jamal and obtained a warrant for his arrest, the money was no longer recoverable by conventional means. It had been compressed, loaded, and transported to the Bridgeton landfill. The bags had been dumped into Cell 7, Section B at approximately 9:20 a.m., then covered by incoming waste from dozens of other trucks. Within hours, thousands of tons of refuse had been layered over them. The landfill operator, Thomas Whitfield, explained the reality to Detective Pierce in stark terms. Cell 7 was active, meaning it received between 800 and 1,200 tons of waste every day. The bags could be anywhere in a zone roughly the size of a football field, buried under anywhere from 5 to 20 feet of compacted refuse. And every hour that passed meant more material was being dumped on top. The St. Louis Police Department faced an unprecedented decision. They could attempt a landfill excavation, an operation that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, require specialized equipment, and might still fail to locate the money. Or they could focus on building a criminal case against Jamal Richardson and accept that the cash itself might never be recovered. They chose both approaches. On the morning of October 19th, 43 hours after the theft, Detective Pierce knocked on the door of Jamal's apartment. Jamal answered in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his youngest daughter eating cereal at the kitchen table behind him. He was calm, unsurprised. He had known they would come. At the police station, Jamal made no attempt to deny what he had done. He explained, in careful detail, how he had found the bags, recognized their contents, and made his decision. He described loading them into the truck, driving to the transfer station, and watching them disappear into the receiving pit. When Detective Pierce asked if he had taken any of the money, kept any portion for himself, Jamal's answer was simple. No. Every dollar had gone into the landfill. He had not opened the bags beyond that initial inspection. He had not removed a single bill. The detective found this hard to believe, but as the investigation progressed, the evidence supported Jamal's account. His bank records showed no unusual deposits. His apartment contained no hidden cash. His spending patterns had not changed. He had not suddenly paid off debts or made unusual purchases. He had simply buried $4.9 million and gone home to sleep. While Jamal sat in a holding cell, the real work began at the Bridgeton landfill. The St. Louis Police Department, working with the FBI and the Missouri Gaming Commission, organized what would become a 6-day excavation operation. Using GPS logs from the waste trucks and the transfer station's disposal records, engineers identified a target zone of approximately 40,000 square feet. Heavy equipment was brought in. A team of 30 workers, operating under police supervision, began the methodical process of excavating and sorting tons of compacted waste. The conditions were brutal. October temperatures hovered in the 40s, and rain turned the excavation site into a muddy pit. Workers wore hazmat suits and respirators. Every bucket of waste had to be examined, sorted, documented. The smell was overwhelming. The pace was agonizingly slow. After 2 days, they had moved 60 tons of material and found nothing. But on the morning of October 23rd, a worker operating an excavator in the northeast corner of the search zone reported something unusual. His bucket had snagged on heavy-duty plastic that didn't compress like standard refuse. The excavation paused. Workers moved in carefully, removing layers of waste by hand. And there, compressed and filthy but intact, were the 2 bags. The cash inside was damaged but recoverable. The bills were compressed, stained, and reeking of decomposition, but the paper currency had survived. Federal Reserve notes are designed to withstand significant abuse, and these, though traumatized, remained largely intact. Every bundle was accounted for. $4.9 million, minus approximately $18,000 that had been too damaged to preserve. The recovery rate was 99.6%. Jamal Richardson was charged with felony theft, tampering with physical evidence, and unlawful disposal of property. His attorney, a public defender named Angela Morrison, argued that Jamal had not stolen the money in any meaningful sense. He had found it, yes. He had moved it, yes. But he had not kept it, spent it, or attempted to profit from it. The money had never left the waste disposal system. It had simply gone where it was supposed to go, into the trash. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Kevin Walsh, saw it differently. Jamal had knowingly taken possession of property that did not belong to him. He had removed it from the casino with full knowledge of its value and nature. The fact that he had chosen to dispose of it rather than keep it did not absolve him of theft. Intent was clear. Action was documented. The law was unambiguous. The case went to trial in March 2007. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before returning a verdict: guilty on all counts. Jamal Richardson was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, noted the unusual nature of the case. Jamal had not enriched himself. He had not lived a double life. He had simply made a catastrophic decision in a moment of weakness, and that decision had cost the state hundreds of thousands of dollars in recovery operations. The Riverside Grand Casino implemented sweeping changes to its cash handling procedures. Deposit bags were redesigned with bright orange color coding that made them impossible to confuse with standard waste bags. The pickup zone outside cash operations was moved inside the secured perimeter. Additional cameras were installed throughout the service corridors, and every employee who handled refuse near the cash operations area underwent specialized training on identification and protocol. Sharon Hodges, the counter who had mistakenly placed the bags in the pickup zone, was not criminally charged. The casino's internal investigation determined that she had been overworked, inadequately trained, and operating without proper supervision. She was terminated from her position but faced no legal consequences. The Missouri Gaming Commission cited the casino for inadequate oversight and imposed a $200,000 fine. As for the money itself, after extensive cleaning and verification, the recovered cash was returned to the Federal Reserve. The bills that were too damaged to preserve were destroyed according to standard protocol. The casino's insurance covered the loss during the recovery period, and Tri-County Waste Management implemented new inspection procedures for all loads originating from gaming facilities. Jamal Richardson served 4 years and 2 months of his sentence. He was released on parole in December 2010 and returned to St. Louis, where he found work in a warehouse distribution center. His daughters, then teenagers, had lived with his sister during his incarceration. The family reunited quietly, without fanfare or media attention. In the years since, Jamal has never given an interview. He has never written a book or appeared on television. Those who know him say he is a quiet man who keeps to himself, arrives at work on time, and lives a modest, unremarkable life. When asked why he did what he did, why he chose to destroy the money rather than keep it or return it, he has no clear answer. In the moment, he says, it seemed like the only choice that made sense. Not a choice to profit, but a choice to make the money disappear, to eliminate the evidence of the casino's mistake, to solve a problem that had fallen into his hands. Detective Pierce, who retired from the St. Louis Police Department in 2015, still considers the case one of the strangest of his career. The theft had no winners. The casino got its money back but spent more recovering it than the insurance would have paid. The city spent resources on an operation that was more archaeological dig than police work, and Jamal gained nothing except a criminal record and 4 years of his life. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case was how close it came to working. If Sharon Hodges had not made her mistake, or if she had noticed it before Jamal's rounds, the money would never have left the building. If the transfer station had processed the waste just a few hours faster, the bags might have been buried too deep to recover. If Jamal had kept even a small portion of the money, the case would have followed a different path entirely. The security footage from that night has been studied extensively in training programs for casino security personnel nationwide. The moment when Jamal pauses, inspects the bag, and makes his decision is dissected frame by frame. What makes someone choose that path? What internal calculation tips the balance from law-abiding citizen to criminal? The experts offer various theories, but none fully explain why a man would throw away millions of dollars he could have hidden, spent, or used to transform his life. The Bridgeton landfill still operates today, processing waste from across the St. Louis metropolitan area. Cell 7, Section B has long since been filled, capped, and covered with topsoil. Grass grows over the spot where workers dug for 6 days in the rain, searching for bags of cash in an ocean of refuse. Nothing marks the location. Nothing commemorates the event. And somewhere in St. Louis, Jamal Richardson continues his life. A man whose name is attached to one of the strangest theft cases in modern American history. A man who, for reasons he may never fully articulate, chose to bury a fortune rather than claim it. A man whose moment of decision, captured on grainy security footage in a fluorescent-lit hallway, serves as a permanent reminder that opportunity and choice are separated by the thinnest of margins. The case asks questions that have no comfortable answers. What would you have done in that hallway? When the invisible becomes visible, when the system fails and leaves a decision in your hands, what path would you choose? The law has its answer. Society has its judgment. But in the space between discovery and action, in those few seconds when Jamal Richardson stood alone with 2 bags and a choice, the answer was anything but clear. The cameras were always recording. The system was always watching. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was a decision made in darkness, in exhaustion, in a corridor where nobody was supposed to be paying attention. And that decision, more than the theft itself, more than the recovery or the trial or the sentence, remains the most haunting element of the story. $4.9 million buried by morning. A fortune destroyed rather than stolen. A life derailed not by greed but by a choice that defied every rational calculation. That's the real crime at the heart of this story. Not what Jamal Richardson took, but what he threw away. The aftermath of Jamal Richardson's case rippled through the St. Louis community in ways that extended far beyond the casino industry and law enforcement circles. In the neighborhoods where Jamal had lived and worked, the story took on different meanings depending on who was telling it. To some, he was a cautionary tale about the consequences of momentary weakness. To others, he was something more complicated, a man who had rejected the very thing that might have saved him from a life of struggle. His defense attorney, Angela Morrison, spent months after the trial trying to understand her client's motivation. She had handled hundreds of theft cases, and in nearly every one, the defendant had clear intentions: take the money, hide it, spend it, use it to solve immediate problems or fulfill long-held desires. But Jamal had done none of these things. In their conversations, both before and after his conviction, he struggled to articulate why he had chosen disposal over possession. The best explanation he could offer was that keeping the money felt impossible, but returning it felt equally impossible. And so, destruction became the only path his mind could process in that moment of crisis. Morrison believed that Jamal's decision revealed something profound about the psychological weight of sudden, unearned wealth. The money was too large, too significant, too transformative. It carried with it the implicit knowledge that taking it would mean living forever as a different person, looking over his shoulder, waiting for discovery. But returning it would mean admitting he had considered keeping it, documenting his moment of weakness, potentially losing his job and facing charges anyway for his hesitation. In his mind, making the money disappear solved both problems. It eliminated the temptation and the evidence simultaneously. A forensic psychologist named Dr. Linda Chen was consulted by the prosecution to evaluate Jamal's mental state and decision-making capacity. Her report, submitted to the court during sentencing, painted a picture of a man experiencing acute situational stress and cognitive overload. The discovery of the bags had triggered what Chen called a paradox of choice under extreme pressure. Jamal's brain, faced with an impossible decision and limited time to make it, had defaulted to what seemed like a neutral option: maintain the status quo of his routine while eliminating the source of the dilemma. Chen's report noted that Jamal showed no signs of sociopathic tendencies, no history of criminal thinking, and no indicators of the kind of personality that typically engages in theft. He was, by all psychological measures, an ordinary person who had been placed in an extraordinary circumstance without the mental framework to process it rationally. The report concluded that Jamal's actions, while criminal, were more indicative of psychological collapse than criminal intent. But the law, as the judge reminded everyone during sentencing, does not make allowances for poor decision-making under stress when the decision results in significant financial harm. The excavation operation alone had cost the city of St. Louis $470,000. The casino had lost revenue during the investigation period. The Gaming Commission had to dedicate resources to oversight and policy revision. The total economic impact exceeded $2 million, all triggered by Jamal's choice to load 2 bags onto his cart instead of reporting their presence. During his incarceration at the Jefferson City Correctional Center, Jamal became something of a curiosity among both inmates and staff. His case had received enough media coverage that most people in the facility knew who he was and what he had done. In the strange social hierarchy of prison, where crimes are ranked and judged by their own internal logic, Jamal occupied an unusual position. He had stolen millions but kept nothing. He was neither a successful criminal to be admired nor a complete failure to be mocked. He was simply an anomaly. His cellmate for the first 18 months, a man named Derek Williams who was serving time for armed robbery, later told a journalist that Jamal rarely spoke about the case. When other inmates would ask him why he didn't keep the money, why he didn't hide even a small amount, Jamal would simply shrug and say he hadn't thought it through. Derek, who had planned his own crime meticulously and still been caught, found this answer both frustrating and fascinating. Here was a man who had stumbled into the opportunity of a lifetime, and had somehow found a way to fail at both stealing and not stealing. The psychological toll of imprisonment was significant for Jamal, though he expressed it differently than many inmates. He didn't rail against the injustice of his sentence, or claim he had been treated unfairly. Instead, he seemed to sink into a profound depression rooted in the recognition of his own incomprehensible behavior. In sessions with the prison psychologist, he would return repeatedly to the same question: why had he done it? Not why had he taken the bags, but why had he destroyed them? What had he been thinking? The inability to answer his own question haunted him more than the sentence itself. His daughters visited him monthly, driven by his sister, who had taken custody when he was sentenced. The visits were difficult. His oldest daughter, Keisha, was 15 when he went to prison, old enough to understand the magnitude of what had happened. She struggled with anger, not at his crime but at his waste. $4.9 million could have changed their lives forever. They could have moved to a better neighborhood, attended better schools, gone to college without debt. Instead, her father had buried it all and ended up in prison anyway, leaving them exactly where they had started, but with the added burden of his absence. His younger daughter, Tamara, was only 11 when he was sentenced. She visited him with drawings and school papers, chattering about her friends and teachers, trying to maintain a connection to a father she was slowly forgetting. Jamal would smile and nod, ask questions about her homework, and then return to his cell to stare at the concrete ceiling and wonder what he had destroyed beyond just money. Back in St. Louis, the Riverside Grand Casino had become a case study in security protocol failure. Gaming industry publications analyzed every aspect of the incident, from the understaffing that led to Sharon Hodges' mistake to the physical layout that allowed unsecured bags to be placed in an accessible location. The consensus among experts was that the casino's security had been designed to prevent external threats, but had failed to account for the vulnerability created by routine internal operations. The redesigned protocols implemented after the incident became industry standard within 2 years. Casinos across the country adopted color-coded bag systems, implemented mandatory 2-person verification for all cash transfers, and installed additional monitoring in service corridors. The Jamal Richardson case was taught in gaming security courses as an example of how catastrophic failures can emerge not from sophisticated criminal planning, but from the intersection of human error and opportunity. Sharon Hodges, whose mistake had initiated the entire sequence of events, left St. Louis 6 months after the incident. She moved to Indianapolis and found work in retail management, a field far removed from cash handling and high-security environments. In the one interview she granted to a local television station in 2008, she spoke about the weight of knowing that her error had set everything in motion. She had been exhausted, overwhelmed, and inadequately trained. She had made a mistake that any person in her position might have made under similar circumstances, but the consequences of that mistake had been extraordinary. She thought about Jamal Richardson often, she said. She had never met him, never spoken to him, but she felt a strange connection to him. They were both people who had made mistakes under pressure, who had failed in moments when the system depended on them to succeed. The difference was that her mistake had cost her a job, while his had cost him years of freedom. The unfairness of that disparity troubled her, though she understood intellectually why the law treated them differently. Detective Raymond Pierce, in his retirement, gave occasional lectures at the St. Louis Police Academy about the case. He would show the security footage of Jamal pausing in the hallway, inspecting the bag, making his choice. He would walk the cadets through the investigation, the landfill excavation, the recovery process. But the part of the lecture that always generated the most discussion was the question of motive. Pierce would ask his students, was Jamal Richardson a thief? By the letter of the law, yes. He had taken a property that didn't belong to him with the intent to permanently deprive the owner of it. But was he a thief in the traditional sense? Someone who steals for personal gain? The answer was less clear. He had gained nothing. He had lost everything. His crime had been an act of destruction, not acquisition. Some cadets argued that his intent didn't matter, that the action itself was criminal regardless of outcome. Others suggested that the case revealed a gap in how the law categorizes theft, that there should be a distinction between stealing for profit and stealing for elimination. The debates would continue long after the lecture ended, spilling into the academy cafeteria and squad car conversations. The case had no clean answers, which made it perfect for teaching the complexity of criminal justice. The Bridgeton landfill operation had its own lasting impact on waste management practices. The successful recovery of the money proved that large-scale excavation of active landfills was technically possible, though economically impractical in most circumstances. Waste management companies began implementing better documentation systems for commercial loads, particularly those originating from high-security facilities. GPS tracking became standard. Photographic documentation of loads increased. The industry recognized that landfills, long considered the final destination for waste, might occasionally need to become crime scenes. Thomas Whitfield, the landfill operator who had overseen the excavation, retired in 2012. He kept a photograph on his office wall from the day the bags were recovered. Workers in hazmat suits standing around the muddy pit, the black bags visible in the center of the frame. Under the photo was a small plaque that read, "The most expensive garbage in Missouri history." When visitors would ask about it, he would tell the story, still shaking his head in amazement at the whole affair. The 2 bags themselves, after being photographed and documented as evidence, were cleaned and stored in the St. Louis Police Department's evidence facility. They remained there through the trial and appeals process, then were eventually destroyed according to standard protocols for case evidence after the statute of limitations expired. The money, once cleaned and verified, had been returned to circulation through the Federal Reserve. Those bills are presumably still in circulation today, carrying no trace of their time buried under tons of refuse, no indication of the strange journey they took from casino floor to landfill pit and back again. Jamal's release from prison in December 2010 was quiet and unannounced. He walked out of Jefferson City Correctional Center on a cold Tuesday morning with $320 in gate money, a bus ticket to St. Louis, and a folder full of parole paperwork. His sister picked him up from the Greyhound station, downtown, and they drove to her house in North St. Louis County without speaking much. The silence between them was comfortable, the quiet of people who understood each other without needing to explain. Reintegration was difficult. Finding employment with a felony conviction is challenging under any circumstances, but Jamal's case carried additional complications. His crime was unusual enough that potential employers would look him up online, read the articles, watch the news reports, and form their own judgments. Some saw him as unreliable, someone who had made an inexplicable choice and might do so again. Others saw him as a curiosity, someone to ask questions about, to treat as a story rather than a person. He eventually found work at a distribution warehouse for a medical supply company in Maryland Heights. The job was similar to his casino work in many ways: monotonous, physically demanding, invisible. He loaded boxes, operated forklifts, and maintained inventory. He clocked in on time, did his work without complaint, and clocked out. His coworkers eventually stopped asking about his past. He became, once again, part of the background, a figure in a safety vest moving through warehouse aisles. His relationship with his daughters required slow rebuilding. Keisha, in her 20s by the time of his release, maintained a cordial but distant relationship. She had lived through her teenage years without a father, had made decisions and faced challenges alone. She couldn't forget what he had thrown away, couldn't fully forgive the waste of opportunity that had taken him from her. They would meet for occasional lunches, exchange holiday calls, but the closeness they had once shared never fully returned. Tamara, younger and with fewer memories of life before his incarceration, found reconciliation easier. She was in college at the University of Missouri, studying social work, and saw her father through a more analytical lens. She understood his crime as a psychological event, a moment of breakdown rather than malicious intent. They spoke weekly, and she would visit him on weekends when she came home to St. Louis. In her senior thesis, she would write about the criminal justice system's treatment of non-traditional offenders, using her father's case as a central example. The years passed quietly for Jamal Richardson. He worked, paid his rent, attended his parole meetings, and slowly rebuilt fragments of a normal life. He never returned to the Riverside Grand Casino, though it remained open and operational, a glittering monument to chance and risk on the banks of the Mississippi River. He never drove past the Bridgeton landfill, though the waste management company had expanded, and Cell 7 was now somewhere in the middle of a vast expanse of capped and grassed-over waste cells.